In this video, we'll discuss the goals of lighting, the different types of lights, and their purposes, and then add some light to our world. The goals of lighting include illumination, modeling, focus, and a tool to create a visual style. Let's talk a bit more about the first three goals. Without illumination, we will not be able to see anything in our game world. With illumination, we'll be able to see that there are game objects within our scene, but illumination alone is often not enough. With the proper type of lighting, we will use lights for modeling. That is, we can reveal the structural and dimensional qualities of our game objects. We can also use lights to reveal spatial relationships between models and help establish the time of day. And lastly, with lights we can create contrast within the scene. That is, create areas of dark and light. This can be used to help direct and focus the player's attention. This table summarizes the type of basic lights we have in Unity and their primary purpose. Lights can be either direct or indirect. Direct light is light that is emitted, hits the surface once, and is then reflected directly into a sensor, such as the game camera. Indirect light is all other light that is ultimately reflected into the camera, including light that hits surfaces several times, and skylight. Unity can calculate direct lighting, indirect lighting, or both. The lighting techniques that Unity uses depends on how you configure your project. Lights can also be calculated in real time or baked. Real-time lighting is when Unity calculates lighting at runtime while the game plays. Baked lighting is when Unity performs lighting calculations in advance within the editor and saves the results as lighting data, which is then applied at runtime. In Unity, your project can use real-time lighting, baked lighting, or a mixture of the two. There are a few things to realize with the lighting in game engines such as Unity. Lights have no geometry. We see results of light, but we do not see light itself. If you want to see a light, such as a light bulb, you need to have a 3D model of the light bulb and then put a real-time light inside of it to effectively turn it on. Lights are processor intensive. The more lights you have, the more it will slow down the performance of your game for real-time lights, or the longer it will take to calculate the lighting for baked lighting. Shadows and other lighting effects will also negatively affect performance, so you should use lights sparingly. Overall, lighting is a complex topic with a lot of depth. We'll just scratch the surface in this project. Our objectives will be to adjust the directional light and add a light to our sun so it looks like it's emitting light out towards the planets. Okay, before I get too far here, I'm going to close up some of my folders here in the project just to kind of clean up the view of what we're seeing. And one thing that I want to mention is, we've been creating game objects and we've been using game assets. Game objects typically are just part of the scene. So whatever we save within our scene is the game objects. Game assets are separate files. So for example, the Earth, the Sun, the Moon, these are not separate files in the file system. These game objects are part of the scene. And all of the components of those are part of the scene as well. And lights are basically just a component. So if I look at this directional light, it is a game object. So game objects always have transforms, for example. And this game object happens to have a light component on it. So any game object can have a light component on it. It doesn't have to be, a game object with just a light component, for example. So when we created this new scene, Unity automatically gives us a directional light. You can always delete that if you don't want a directional light, but it gave us a directional light. And the reason it does that is it allows us to be able to see things in our scene. If we didn't have any light in our scene, our world would be dark, or basically just ambient light is what we would see. So the reason that we're seeing kind of a little flare here is because of that directional light. So for example, this is a game object, so I'm going to make sure it's selected. I'm going to tap F, and you can see right there, there's our directional light. So it shows this little gizmo icon, which you can turn those off if you don't want those. So here in our scene view, so this little gizmo icon is shown in our scene view, and you can see that there is a little gizmo button. And then, if you click the gizmo button, it will overall turn on and turn off the gizmos. So one thing that I want to show is the direction of this light is in this direction, and you can see where it's hitting these game objects from that direction. And this has a transform on it, so I can change, for example, the rotation. So if I actually change the rotation here, you can see how it's affecting where the light is actually striking on those game objects. And the interesting thing about a directional light is it doesn't really matter where it is in the world. It's sort of like the position in the game world is just the proxy for a direction of like the sun that's super far away. The position isn't actually here. This is just a proxy showing the rotation. So as I move this around and put this in different places of the scene, notice as I move it around, it doesn't change where it's actually striking these. The only thing that changes where it's striking it is the rotation. So that's one of the interesting things about directional lights. Now, this directional light may seem a little bit intense. Once again, we could just delete it if we didn't want any directional light, because why would there be something shining on the sun right here? But once again, it's nice to kind of use that to see a little bit, kind of the dark side of a planet, for example. You can see the directional light will shine that, but it's a little bit intense. So let's turn the intensity down a little bit. So that is actually a property of the light. You can see intensity here. It's set to 1. 1 generally means like 100%. So if I set this to something like 0.3, it's going to be 30% intensity. Now we can still see the sun and the earth and the moon. They're a little bit dark, but we have some light, but it's not too bright. So the next thing that I want to do is I actually want to make my sun actually have light. So if I go to the sun again, let me click on that game object and press F to zoom to it. There's basically 2 ways of doing this. One is we can actually create a light. So here in the hierarchy view, let me hit the drop down here, and you can see light is an option, and these are the various lights that we can create in Unity. And for the sun, it's not a directional light. A directional light would be, if we're on a planet and the sun is out in outer space and, and shining down on the planet. But this is actually, a solar system model. So the sun is part of it, and we want the sun to emit light out. So the type of light that we want to pick is actually a point light, like a light bulb. So they're, it's centered in one place and light comes out from it. So let me choose point light here, and you can see the little gizmo shows up here. We want to make sure the game object location is at 0, 0, 0, which is, the position of the sun, which it happens to be. So let me zoom out here, and if I zoom out far enough, you can see this outer circle here. And this outer circle is actually showing the range of the light. So anything within this circle is getting hit by that light. Anything out here would be not affected by that light. So you can see my range is pretty big here. I'm going to actually reduce the range, so that's actually a property of the point light. And I'm going to, dial it down to maybe 5. Notice that, in the interface here, we can select it and we can just type 5, for example. And let me zoom back in a little bit. Or the other thing that you can do is if you select kind of to the left of that input, you get this little double arrow. And if you click and hold, you can drag down or drag back up. And you can see, the numbers are changing, and you can see the visual effect there in the scene. So once again, let me make this 5. You could really make it whatever you want, but I'm just trying to demonstrate, some properties of this light. And I'm going to change the color of the light, and I'm going to make it maybe a light yellow. So I'll bring up my color picker here and move this outer thing to kind of the yellow area, then use the inner thing to actually set the color, and go ahead and close that. So you can see I changed the color there. There's a preview. And once again, we can modify the intensity. We can turn it up, and see as I turn it up, let me zoom in on the Earth. You can see that there is the sun striking there. So that's probably a little bit too intense. So let me go back to the point light and turn the intensity back down. Maybe we'll set it to something like 2. And of course, you can just, modify directly if you want something precise. Now, one other option of the point light, let me hit F I can zoom to that, is this draw halo option. So let me click the draw halo, and you can see that it kind of creates, sort of a halo effect around the light. so we can kind of visually see the light. And if I zoom in, for example, on the, kind of on the Earth, you can see the halo sort of striking the Earth there. So this is kind of a nice little effect that we can use. I'll leave it up to you if you want this on or off. So once again, under the point light, you can turn on or turn off the halo effect. And notice you can actually change the range of the sun, so I can actually do it up here, or you can actually click on the little control node here and make my intensity bigger or smaller, and that's going to affect the halo as well. So I'm just going to undo to go back to 5 as it were, and I'll turn off my halo. Okay, so we've got this point light. It is a separate game object, but we want it to be part of the sun. So one way we can do that is we can take that point light and we can drag and drop it on the sun. This will make that point light game object a child of the sun. And this is great if you want the the light to be basically a separate game object for some reason. But another thing that you can actually do is you can take that light component and you can just put it on the sun game object. So a quick way, now that we've got the point light set up, is under a component, there's these little 3 dots here. You can click on that, and whenever you see those little 3 dots, it's basically a menu. So you can see I can actually copy this component, and then if I go to the sun, really anywhere I can select any of these drop downs on any of these components, and then I can say paste component as new, because the component is in the clipboard. So I'll say paste component is new. You can see now I've got a light component here within the sun. So if I go back to the point light now, I can select it and I can right click and then say delete, or as a keyboard shortcut you can press Command delete. That's just a shortcut to delete game objects. So once again, back on the sun now, we've got a light component. So once again, lights are just components of game objects, and notice every component you can turn on and turn off. So we can have a component that is on, or we can have a component that is off. So when I turn it on, you can actually see the range of the light. You can see how it affects. If I turn on the halo, we can really tell it's when the light is off or the light is on. Okay, we've got a couple lights in our world now. We have the directional light, we just adjusted it a bit, and we have the sun now that has a point light on it. And once again, lighting is a fairly complex topic. You can go to the little question mark under any component, including lights, and read about the documentation for lights, and we'll of course talk more about lighting in future projects. So just to finish up this video, I'm going to go ahead and do File, Save Scene.